their demands. I don't think. I think it's going to be, the reaction will be quite serious and maybe violent.
What's more, even those most involved in fighting for the return of their country, like these resistance leaders, say they can't be sure they will get the promised democracy.
Well, don't ask me. Ask the Sabah or the officials.
In a free Kuwait, some of the leaders continue to protect their identity. They are afraid they may be seen as a threat. The Kuwaiti army is now already searching for enemies. At checkpoints, they pull aside Jordanians, Palestinians, those who might have collaborated with the Iraqis, and worse.
And a lot of people that got killed, Kuwaiti killed from Palestinians, really a lot. This is, we throw it out. This is Iraqi, but we don't like it. We throw it out. We don't put Kuwait to it was before.
But Kuwait can never be as before. Right now, that seems the only point of agreement. This is Sheila McVicker for Nightline in Kuwait City.
And joining us once again is the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, a member of the royal family, Sheikh Saud Nasir Al Sabah. Mr. Ambassador, pick up anywhere you like, where it just looks as though there is so much turmoil brewing in Kuwait, and I suppose it is understandable after such a traumatic 7-month period. But as you and I were discussing before the program, you're under the impression that the resistance is giving up all its weapons. I must tell you, my impression is exactly the opposite.
Well, Ted, I think we've just saw ourselves a demonstration of the freedom of speech in Kuwait by those people, which I also personally know, Mr. Bishar and others, they're colleagues of mine, and I think they're entitled to their views, and we have always been entitled to our views in Kuwait. We always spoke so openly and with the complete impunity. So,
but they're talking about more than talking now, Mr. Ambassador. They're talking about voting. They're talking about playing an active role in running the government. And they apparently are not prepared to take no for an answer.
Well, nobody said no, Ted. Nobody said no at all. I mean, the deliberation that took place between the People's Congress and the Emir in Jeddah was very clear and unequivocal in the political demands. But the priorities of the government also at that time was the liberation of Kuwait. You know, things have to come first. Then once the people are back in Kuwait, they could discuss their domestic issues. And this demonstrates the democracy. When you talk about the resistance movement, as though that my family and others were not involved, my brother is involved in heading a major resistance movement inside Kuwait. My other cousins are also involved in it. It's a collective effort by all Kuwaitis, from the family and from the outside the family. We are one unit in that country. So trying to draw this line as though those people stayed behind as resistance while the family fled, that's a wrong impression. My brother is still there, my other family's members are still there. So this is something which we all Kuwaitis share responsibility for. But again, it's important that there is a commitment on the part of the Prime Minister and the Emir. Once the martial law is over for a three-month period, I believe the law was passed, which is natural for a country which has been under occupation and all the chaos inside the country, the confusion, you must have some kind of martial law in order to separate what the elements of danger inside the country.
Is it
then
required?
You could address the issue of domestic policies. And I think, you know, we're mixing up the priorities here.
Is it required under martial law that members of the resistance give up their weapons?
I think it's required under martial law that the law and order should be restored to the proper people, and that the security people and the army that are in the country itself. The resistance movements should have a part in identifying the security needs of the country since they were there since the 7 months of the invasion.
And what about giving up their weapons?
I think giving up the weapons are the people who are irresponsible, cannot handle the weapons. But people who are responsible, they are helping our police and our army in identifying collaborators and identifying the pockets of still Iraqi groups inside Kuwait and other elements that cause concern to our security and stability in Kuwait. So we are going through a very dangerous transitional period. Don't expect that everything will be back to normal in days. I mean, you went there, I believe, 2 or 3 days after the liberation. So things are still in a state of confusion. You need time to separate these powers, to restore law and order, and then once that's restored, apart from all the services that you need to restore in the country, to get the people back in the country, then we can sit quietly and implement and talk about the future.
Mr. Ambassador, forgive me just for interrupting you. I just want to warn our affiliates we're going to go a couple of minutes over because there are one or two more issues I just wanted to raise with you, Mr. Ambassador.
You know, Ted, Kuwait has always been a nation in search of democracy, a democratic system befitting for our customs, laws, and tradition. Kuwait has always been singled out as the country that is pro-democracy movements. It's a pro-democracy government. But we've had political situations in the area which hampered this drive. We're all pro-democracy. If you're referring to those people as pro-democracy movements, I'm one of them. I'm one of the pro-democracy movements because I believe in democracy. But the proper democracy where the separations of powers have to be identified properly, unequivocally, and in a manner which is befitting for the country.
Mr. Ambassador, what's going to happen to the Palestinians in Kuwait today? Do you think it's possible for all of them to remain in Kuwait?
It's important, I think, here, Ted, I saw the piece you showed here with regard to the Palestinians. You know, a number of Palestinians actually assisted our resistance movements. They worked with our resistance movement inside Kuwait, while others collaborated with the Iraqis. And we must draw a line here, a very clear line for us all. We should not assimilate the leadership of the Palestinians with the Palestinian people. The leadership has failed in their duty, and we are upset. We feel completely hurt by their position, but this should not reflect on the Palestinian people.
You spoke to one of my colleagues earlier today and suggested...
Unrest can press it. Pentagon officials said about a dozen Iraqi cities were reporting unrest. Kurdish rebels today claimed they took control of a northern Iraqi city. Other opposition forces claimed to control 2 southern Iraqi cities. The Pentagon said Iraq's Republican Guard and other loyalist forces were using artillery and heavy weapons to put down the unrest. Thousands of refugees are crossing into Kuwait to avoid the fighting. We have a report by independent television news correspondent Desmond Hamill in Kuwait.
The big rush back to Kuwait has started. These refugees, ironically, had first fled from Kuwait to escape fighting. Now, with civil war in southern Iraq, they were escaping back again through forward Allied lines.
Come on, that's it, keep it coming. Yeah, you want to go home, let's do it.
They were being shepherded by the Americans, worried that the Kuwaitis would not be over-welcoming to non-nationals. But when they stopped for a rest, all they wanted to talk about was the fighting in Basra and Nasiriyah.
And what's it like in Iraq now?
A revolution is going there.
Is it now?
Yeah.
The revolution?
Yeah.
There's a lot of fighting?
Yeah, a lot of fighting between the Republican Army and the Republican Guards and the people there.
Where have you just come from?
From Nasiriyah.
What's happening in Iraq? Is there much fighting or what?
Yes, yes. And the people shouting. The people.
We heard accounts of how the anti-Saddam feeling is growing.
Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein not. But...
Police? No police.
Hey. Nasiriyah.
Others, through translators, spoke of a growing revolution outside Baghdad.
The revolution is all outside Baghdad, not in Baghdad.
This evening, the refugees, mostly non-Kuwaiti nationals, are safe from the fighting in Iraq and now face reassimilation into society here. After all that's happened, that might not be easy.
Iran's President Rafsanjani today expressed concern over the rebellion in Iraq and the flood of Iraqi refugees into his country. He urged Allied forces to leave Iraq and let the region's countries solve their own problems. Iran's news agencies said Rafsanjani made the comments in a telephone conversation with German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. Iraq's deputy prime minister turned up unexpectedly in Tehran today. Iranian officials said he was carrying a message for President Rafsanjani from Saddam Hussein. Meanwhile, Iraq's Revolutionary Council today renounced the annexation of Kuwait, another of the conditions for a permanent ceasefire. It also promised to return aircraft, money, and gold seized in its takeover of the nation. Jim?
35 more Allied prisoners of war were turned over to the Red Cross in Iraq today. 15 were Americans. Baghdad Radio claimed all Allied POWs had now been released, but Pentagon officials said 29 Allied service people remain unaccounted for. Bad weather prevented the 35 set free today from being flown out of Iraq and also delayed plans to release nearly 300 Iraqi POWs from Saudi Arabia. The flights have been rescheduled for tomorrow. The Associated Press said the first large group of U.S. troops will return from the Gulf in the next few days. There was no official confirmation. AP quoted a Pentagon official saying 15,000 will be home within a week. The Kuwaiti government said nearly 30,000 of its citizens were kidnapped and taken to Iraq. The Red Cross said it was trying to negotiate the release of an undetermined number of those civilians. 28 Western journalists are missing in Iraq. They are from American, British, French, and Italian news organizations. A Pentagon spokesman said the group passed a U.S. military checkpoint at the Kuwait-Iraq border and then traveled north toward Basra. A U.S. military official said they could be in danger because of the internal fighting in Iraq.
In Washington, the House Appropriations Committee today passed a $42.6 billion package to finance U.S. war costs. About $15 billion of that is expected to come from U.S. taxpayers. The rest has been promised by other countries. The committee also approved an administration proposal to give Israel $650 million for its war-related expenses. Israel originally asked for $1 billion. The compromise package reportedly came after several days of negotiations between the administration and Israeli officials. First tonight, we update the insurrection in Iraq against the rule of Saddam Hussein. In a diverse nation of 17 million people, but politically controlled by Saddam's minority Sunni Muslims, the uprisings have taken on a religious and ethnic character, according to some reports. They're most pronounced and widespread in two areas. In Basra and other towns in southern Iraq, a region made up primarily of Shiite Muslims, and in the north, where members of the Kurdish nationality are numerous. Kurdish guerrillas reportedly have taken control of one provincial capital, Erbil. At the Pentagon today, a briefing officer said the government was bringing in loyal troops who were untouched by the Kuwait War and predicted they would prevail, at least for a while.
About a dozen of the countries, of the various cities, we have had reports of activity. And what we've done is to highlight in the various areas where the activity is the highest. Reporting of artillery and heavy weapons use against insurgents. We do not yet have any indication of leadership in control of the overall activity. I think it was described yesterday as chaotic and spontaneous. It appears that it's still that way. There was some questioning with regard to what part the Iranians might be playing. There is no direct evidence to link the Iranians to this particular situation. I just would note that the public commentary coming out of Iran is favorable toward the Shias and their efforts in this part of the country, and it has been very unfavorable with regard to Saddam Hussein and his leadership and his fitness to guide the country in the future.
Well, is it your assessment that the Saddam Hussein loyalists will suppress this insurrection?
I believe that will be the case. Whether Saddam Hussein can do this over time, 6 months, a year, more than that, that's still open to question. But I believe they probably will be successful in putting this down because of the lack of organization and leadership.
Can you speculate on why you think he'll control it?
Basra has quieted down for the current time frame, and I'm only making a judgment on the basis of the comparative force. Spontaneous, unarmed, lack of communications, lack of leadership on the part of the insurrection or the activity we see on the part of the Shias in this part of the country. With a command structure, a relatively large force, it seems to me that he would be able to do that. However, in my opinion, he may be sowing the seeds of his own destruction in the long term.
Admiral, could I follow up? Could you say the second sentence after he's sowing the seeds of his own destruction in the long term?
I think in the long term, Saddam Hussein is going to find it difficult to maintain his control on this nation of 17 million people, a valuable natural resource, and he's invested literally a third of his gross national product for 10 years to build a military machine with a significant power projection capability. He has attempted to project that power into Iran. He was rebuffed. He's attempted to take Kuwait, and he's been sent back. So I think the people of the country over time are going to not be satisfied with that leadership.
Now we hear from three leading exiled Iraqi adversaries of Saddam Hussein. Laith Quba is the Secretary General of the Iraqi Democratic Reform Movement, a secular opposition group based in London. Ahmed Chalabi also has been an anti-Saddam activist for many years. He's formerly a banker from a prominent Shiite Iraqi family. And Hoshyar Zabari, an Iraqi Kurd, is the chief spokesman of the London-based Kurdistan Democratic Party. It represents an ethnic minority in Iraq that has long been at odds with the regime in Baghdad. Mr. Zabari, do you agree with the Pentagon that given the forces at his command, that Mr. Hussein probably will be able to put down this insurrection?
Well, the battle over Kuwait is over, but I believe that the battle to liberate Baghdad from Saddam's dictatorship would be a long and protracted battle. Saddam Hussein still has a substantive amount of troops at his disposal. He has his security apparatus intact still. He has nearly 200,000 troops. So at this stage, one should not underestimate his capability yet, but there has been a popular uprising against him in the south and in the north in the Kurdish regions. We have received today a consistent report that there has been a major uprising in the town of Erbil, in Kirkuk. Similar disturbances and unrest has happened, and in two other smaller towns in the Sulaymaniyah province, in Rania and Chamchamal. In fact, the anger of the people is directed at the security officials and the Ba'ath Party offices and headquarters. The army and the Iraqi army troops in the region have been neutral in this uprising.
But are you saying it's going to be a long battle? You mean that it's unlikely that it's going to be successful? This particular uprising can be successful immediately? Unlikely, do you think?
Well, the most important thing, which this uprising has shown, that the aura of invincibility of Saddam Hussein has been broken. And that has been the main stumbling block against the Iraqi people to challenge Saddam Hussein authority. It's difficult to predict the outcome at this stage, but as you see, it's a popular uprising, and it includes every part of the country.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kuba, do you agree with the Pentagon that it's probable, given the forces at his command, that Mr. Hussein can put this down right now?
I think the outcome of this uprising depends on three factors. A, whether or not there will be a ceasefire now signed at this period, because if there was one, it will be seen as a green light.
You mean a ceasefire in the Kuwait war, between the coalition and Iraq?
That's correct, because that will give Saddam Hussein the political cover to carry out whatever he wants to do within his sovereign borders. The second factor is whether or not the uprising will get some support from neighboring countries. And the third very important factor is whether or not other cities will join in this uprising. I think those three factors will determine whether or not Saddam Hussein has under his disposal the Republican Guard, which was left untouched more or less, and I don't think he'll hesitate at all to use it fully against the...
That's the part of the Republican Guard which was based in the north, not that immediately outside in the Basra area.
That's correct. That's correct. So still, he under his disposal is a good deal of weapons, a well-organized army, and we must not forget that he still has chemical weapons, which he has used in 1988, unchecked, and I think if there was a ceasefire now, he will be tempted to use it again to put down the uprising.
Well, just spell that out. In other words, if the progress towards the ceasefire, which was accelerated today with Iraq's acceptance, having formally rescinded its annexation of Kuwait and promised to return property that it took and so on, if that is formally concluded, why would that make it easier for Saddam to put down this uprising? What difference will that make?
Well, I think in Saddam's mind, somewhere back in his mind, he knows that he has not caused a lot of American casualties. He has not used chemicals. And I think he wants to leave, or he has actually left some of his bridges open to some politicians to argue that he is needed to keep such a difficult country away from extremism. So I think he wants to take one thing at a time. He's playing the tactic. His first challenge is to have political management to this extremely dangerous situation. And he cannot do it without having some cover, making sure that neither Iran nor the Allied will interfere in the way he's going to crush this rebellion.
Well, just to pursue that a little further, are you saying there should be some motive, that there would be a motive for delaying the conclusion of a permanent ceasefire?
Well, my opinion is that the whole world have witnessed Saddam Hussein is not an ordinary governor to a state. And I think unless the world interferes now,
tonight's 8 o'clock movie. You're watching Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
Superb.
I would do anything for my client. I mean, I'm the only chance that he has.
Ingenious.
Did he kill her?
Sizzling.
If I find any evidence of collusion, I'll have you disbarred.
Electrifying.
This is a bad place to have enemies.
Suspect.
Did you kill Elizabeth Rose Quinn?
The verdicts are in on Suspect. Suspect. Rated R. Now playing at a theater near you.
There's a masterpiece with your name on it waiting to be created at Sizzler's incredible all-you-can-eat pasta tostada and salad bar.
Another 30 seconds of common sense. Sometimes it seems everyone wants to sell you a new car. But ask to see something under $7,000 and, well, and heaven forbid you should ask for more than one model to choose from. But be bold. Ask for 7. Now you're talking to your Hyundai dealer. With 7 models priced under $7,000.
And starting at only $52.95.
Really? Maybe we should have asked for a dozen. Just kidding.
Test drive an XL at your Northern California Hyundai dealer. We sell cars that make sense.
The players' strike is over. But what about the future of the 49ers? Will they block for a strike-breaking quarterback? What's wrong with the running game? Is this a playoff team or the team that struggled against Cincinnati?
First, congratulations on the brilliant victory of the Desert Storm operation.
Take the gavel here.
Members of the Congress, I now have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Mr. President and Mr. Speaker, thank you, sir, for those very generous words spoken from the heart about the wonderful performance of our military. Members of Congress, 5 short weeks ago, I came to this House to speak to you about the State of the Union. We met then in time of war. Tonight, we meet in a world blessed by the promise of peace. From the moment Operation Desert Storm commenced on January 16th until the time the guns fell silent at midnight 1 week ago, this nation has watched its sons and daughters with pride, watched over them with prayer. As Commander-in-Chief, I can report to you our armed forces fought with honor and valor. And as President, I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over. This is a victory for every country in the coalition, for the United Nations, a victory for unprecedented international cooperation and diplomacy, so well led by our Secretary of State, James Baker. It is a victory for the rule of law and for what is right. Desert Storm's success belongs to the team that so ably leads our armed forces, our Secretary of Defense and our Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dick Cheney and Colin Powell. And while you're standing, this military victory also belongs to the one the British call the man of the match, the Tower of Calm at the eye of Desert Storm, General Norman Schwarzkopf. And let us, recognizing this was a coalition effort, let us not forget Saudi General Khalid, Britain's General de la Billière, or General Roquefort of France, and all the others whose leadership played such a vital role. And most importantly of all those who served in the field. I thank the members of this Congress. Support here for our troops in battle was overwhelming, and above all, I thank those whose unfailing love and support sustained our courageous men and women. I thank the American people. Tonight I come to this House to speak about the world after war. The recent challenge could not have been clearer. Saddam Hussein was the villain, Kuwait the victim. To the aid of this small country came nations from North America and Europe, from Asia and South America, from Africa, from the Arab world, all united against aggression. Our uncommon coalition must now work in common purpose to forge a future that should never again be held hostage to the darker side of human nature. Tonight in Iraq, Saddam walks amidst ruin. His war machine is crushed. His ability to threaten mass destruction is itself destroyed. His people have been lied to, denied the truth. And when his defeated legions come home, all Iraqis will see and feel the havoc he has wrought. And this I promise you, for all that Saddam has done to his own people, to the Kuwaitis, and to the entire world, Saddam and those around him are accountable. All of us grieve for the victims of war, for the people of Kuwait, and the suffering that scars the soul of that proud nation. We grieve for all our fallen soldiers and their families, for all the innocents caught up in this conflict. And yes, we grieve for the people of Iraq, a people who have never been our enemy. My hope is that one day we will once again welcome them as friends into the community of nations. Our commitment to peace in the Middle East does not end with the liberation of Kuwait. So tonight, let me outline 4 key challenges to be met. First, we must work together to create shared security arrangements in the region. Our friends and allies in the Middle East recognize that they will bear the bulk of the responsibility for regional security, but we want them to know that just as we stood with them to repel aggression, so now America stands ready to work with them to secure the peace. This does not mean stationing U.S. ground forces in the Arabian Peninsula, but it does mean American participation in joint exercises involving both air and ground forces. It means maintaining a capable U.S. naval presence in the region, just as we have for over 40 years. And let it be clear, our vital national interests depend on a stable and secure Gulf. Second, we must act to control the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and the missiles used to deliver them. It would be tragic if the nations of the Middle East and Persian Gulf were now, in the wake of war, to embark on a new arms race. Iraq requires special vigilance. Until Iraq convinces the world of its peaceful intentions, that its leaders will not use new revenues to rearm and rebuild its menacing war machine, Iraq must not have access to the instruments of war. And third, we must work to create new opportunities for peace and stability in the Middle East. On the night I announced Operation Desert Storm, I expressed my hope that out of the horrors of war might come new momentum for peace. We've learned in the modern age, geography cannot guarantee security, and security does not come from military power alone. All of us know the depth of bitterness that has made the dispute between Israel and its neighbors so painful and intractable. Yet, in the conflict just concluded, Israel and many of the Arab states have for the first time found themselves confronting the same aggressor. By now it should be plain to all parties that peacemaking in the Middle East requires compromise. At the same time, peace brings real benefits to everyone. We must do all that we can to close the gap between Israel and the Arab states and between Israelis and Palestinians. The tactics of terror lead absolutely nowhere. There can be no substitute for diplomacy. And comprehensive peace must be grounded in United Nations Security Council resolutions 242 and 338 and the principle of territory for peace. This principle must be elaborated to provide for Israel's security and recognition, and at the same time for legitimate Palestinian political rights. Anything else would fail the twin tests of fairness and security. The time has come to put an end to Arab-Israeli conflict. The war with Iraq is over. The quest for solutions to the problems in Lebanon in the Arab-Israeli dispute and in the Gulf must go forward with new vigor and determination. And I guarantee you, no one will work harder for a stable peace in the region than we will. Fourth, we must foster economic development for the sake of peace and progress. The Persian Gulf and Middle East form a region rich in natural resources with a wealth of untapped human potential. Resources once squandered on military might must be redirected to more peaceful ends. We are already addressing the immediate economic consequences of Iraq's aggression. Now, the challenge is to reach higher, to foster economic freedom and prosperity for all the people of the region. By meeting these four challenges, we can build a framework for peace. I've asked Secretary of State Baker to go to the Middle East to begin the process. He will go to listen, to probe, to offer suggestions, to advance the search for peace and stability. I've also asked him to raise the plight of the hostages held in Lebanon. We have not forgotten them, and we will not forget them. To all the challenges that confront this region of the world, there is no single solution, no solely American answer. But we can make a difference. America will work tirelessly as a catalyst for positive change. But we cannot lead a new world abroad if at home it's politics as usual on American defense and diplomacy. It's time to turn away from the temptation to protect unneeded weapon systems and obsolete bases. It's time to put an end to micromanagement of foreign and security assistance programs. Micromanagement that humiliates our friends and allies and hamstrings our diplomacy. It's time to rise above the parochial and the pork barrel to do what is necessary, what's right, and what will enable this nation to play the leadership role required of us. The consequences of the conflict in the Gulf reach far beyond the confines of the Middle East. Twice before in this century, an entire world was convulsed by war. Twice this century, out of the horrors of war, hope emerged for enduring peace. Twice before, those hopes proved to be a distant dream beyond the grasp of man. Until now, the world we've known has been a world divided, a world of barbed wire and concrete block, conflict, Cold War. Now we can see a new world coming into view, a world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. In the words of Winston Churchill, a world order in which the principles of justice and fair play protect the weak against the strong. A world where the United Nations, freed from Cold War stalemate, is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders. A world in which freedom and respect for human rights find a home among all nations. The Gulf War put this new world to its first test. And my fellow Americans, we passed that test for the sake of our principles, for the sake of the Kuwaiti people. We stood our ground because the world would not look the other way. Ambassador El Saba, tonight, Kuwait is free. Where is it? And we are very happy. happy about that. Tonight, as our troops begin to come home, let us recognize that the hard work of freedom still calls us forward. We've learned the hard lessons of history. The victory over Iraq was not waged as a war to end all wars. Even the New World Order cannot guarantee an era of perpetual peace, but enduring peace must be our mission. Our success in the Gulf will shape not only the New World Order we seek, but our mission here at home. In the war just ended, there were clear-cut objectives, timetables, and above all, an overriding imperative to achieve results. We must bring that same sense of self-discipline, that same sense of urgency to the way we meet challenges here at home. In my State of the Union address and in my budget, I defined a comprehensive agenda to prepare for the next American century. Our first priority is to get this economy rolling again. The fear and uncertainty caused by the Gulf crisis were understandable. But now that the war is over, oil prices are down, interest rates are down, and confidence is rightly coming back. Americans can move forward to lend, spend, and invest in this, the strongest economy on earth. We must also enact the legislation that is key to building a better America. For example, in 1990, we enacted an historic Clean Air Act, and now we've proposed a national energy strategy. We passed a child care bill that put power in the hands of parents, and today we're ready to do the same thing with our schools and expand choice in education. We passed a crime bill that made a useful start in fighting crime and drugs. This year, we're sending to Congress our comprehensive crime package to finish the job. We passed the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, and now we've sent forward our Civil Rights Bill. We also passed the Aviation Bill. This year we've sent up our new Highway Bill. And these are just a few of our pending proposals for reform and renewal. So tonight I call on the Congress to move forward aggressively on our domestic front. Let's begin with two initiatives we should be able to agree on quickly, transportation and crime, and let's build on success with those and enact the rest of our agenda. If our forces could win the ground war in 100 hours, then surely the Congress can pass this legislation in 100 days. Let that be a promise we make tonight to the American people. When I spoke in this House about the state of our union, I asked all of you, if we can selflessly confront evil for the sake of good in a land so far away, then surely we can make this land all that it should be. In the time since then, the brave men and women of Desert Storm accomplished more than even they may realize. They set out to confront an enemy abroad, and in the process, They transformed a nation at home. Think of the way they went about their mission. With confidence and quiet pride. Think about their sense of duty, about all they taught us, about our values, about ourselves. We hear so often about our young people in turmoil, how our children fall short, how our schools fail us, how American products and American workers are second class. Well, don't you believe it. The America we saw in Desert Storm was first-class talent, and they... They did it using America's state-of-the-art technology. We saw the excellence embodied in the Patriot missile and the patriots who made it work. And we saw soldiers who know about honor and bravery and duty and country and the world-shaking power of these simple words. There is something noble and majestic about the pride, about the patriotism that we feel tonight. So to everyone here and everyone watching at home, think about the men and women of Desert Storm. Let us honor them with our gratitude. Let us comfort the families of the fallen and remember each precious life lost. Let us learn from them as well. Let us honor those who have served us by serving others. Let us honor them as individuals, men and women of every race, all creeds and colors, by setting the face of this nation against discrimination, bigotry, and hate. Eliminate them. Sure that many of you saw on the television the unforgettable scene of 4 terrified Iraqi soldiers surrendering. And they emerged from their bunker, broken, tears streaming from their eyes, fearing the worst. And then there was an American soldier. Remember what he said? He said, "It's okay. You're all right now. You're all right now." That scene says a lot about America, a lot about who we are. Americans are a caring people. We are a good people, a generous people. Let us always be caring and good and generous in all we do. Soon, very soon, our troops will begin the march we've all been waiting for, their march home. And I have directed Secretary Cheney to begin the immediate return of American combat units from the Gulf. Less than 2 hours from now, the first plane load of American soldiers will lift off from Saudi Arabia, headed for the USA. And that plane will carry the men and women of the 24th Mechanized Infantry Division bound for Fort Stewart, Georgia. This is just... This is just the beginning of a steady flow of American troops coming home. Let their return remind us that all those who have gone before are linked with us in the long line of freedom's march. Americans have always tried to serve, to sacrifice nobly for what we believe to be right. Tonight, I ask every community in this country to make this coming 4th of July a day of special celebration for our returning troops. They may have missed Thanksgiving and Christmas, but I can tell you this, for them and for their families, we can make this a holiday they'll never forget. In a very real sense, this victory belongs to them, to the privates, and the pilots, the sergeants, and the supply officers, to the men and women in the machines, and the men and women who made them work. It belongs to the regulars, to the reserves, to the National Guard. This victory belongs to the finest fighting force this nation has ever known in its history. We went halfway around the world to do what is moral and just and right. And we fought hard, and with others, we won the war. And we lifted the yoke of aggression and tyranny from a small country that many Americans had never even heard of. And we asked nothing in return. We're coming home now, proud, confident, heads high. There is much that we must do, at home and abroad, and we will do it. We are Americans. May God bless this great nation, the United States of America. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Men and women in the Gulf, and of course that wonderful news for so many families of the 24th Mechanized Division from Fort Stewart in Georgia, a division that General Norman Schwarzkopf once commanded before he went on to command the whole thing, will be coming home tonight, and over the last 24 hours, the Pentagon has also made it clear that men and women of the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne will be coming home as well. The President, I'll make a quick judgment here, seeming more than normal to be moved when speaking about what America means to him and what the commitment around the world means to him, on more than one occasion seeming to just suppress the lump in his throat. Speaking of the future in the Middle East, reaffirming what he said the other day, that he wanted to move aggressively and quickly to try to make peace between Israel and Arabs, and between Israel and Arab nations, and between Israel and the Palestinians, talking about Israeli security and Palestinian political rights. Messages which will reverberate around the Middle East tonight, talking about collective security, talking about what he wants for the United States in terms of military power in the Gulf, not wanting American forces to stay on the ground, but wishing to maintain the American naval presence, which has been traditional in the Persian Gulf. And then calling on the Congress, as the Congress in many cases has called on him, as much of the nation has called on him, to address itself and himself to the economic challenges at home. We will be right back after this message.
President, I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over.
They're coming home. Elements of the 24th Mechanized Infantry are airborne tonight, and it is only the beginning. Now, Channel 7 News.
Good evening, I'm Ana Chavez.
And I'm Richard Brown. They are in the air, heading for America. The first plane load of U.S. service personnel lifted off the ground in Saudi Arabia tonight, headed for the United States. On board, members of the 24th MEC, as they are known, heading for Fort Stewart, Georgia. They will arrive home on Friday, 24 hours after takeoff. And what do soldiers want after 195 days in the desert?
Ready to get this Iraqi dirt off, take a shower.
Does your wife know you're coming home?
I don't know. We haven't had a chance to call, and I'm thinking I might be sitting there at Fort Stewart giving her a call and telling her to come pick me up. Oh, that's all about. Wife and beer. Beer. Most definitely, lots of it.
The 24th Mechanized Infantry played a key role. Deployed far to the west along the Iraqi border, it was the first to rush headlong across the desert, effectively cutting off Iraqi troops from withdrawal.
The newest poll shows President Bush to be the most popular president in American history, with a 94% approval rating of his handling of the Gulf War. It showed tonight on Capitol Hill as he addressed a joint session of Congress. It was a sweet moment of triumph for the president. Even the Democrats who had second-guessed his 7-month showdown with Saddam Hussein were on their feet.
I thank the members of this Congress. Support here for our troops in battle was overwhelming, and above all, I thank those whose unfailing love and support sustained our courageous men and women. I thank the American people.
There were standing ovations for Secretary of State Dick Cheney, Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell, and Allied Commander General Norman Schwarzkopf. Then the president gave more credit where credit was due.
It belongs to the regulars, to the reserves, to the National Guard. This victory belongs to the finest fighting force this nation has ever known in its history.
Mr. Bush remembered 4 Iraqi soldiers kissing the hand of an American Marine. The memory gripped him.
That scene says a lot about America, a lot about who we are. We are Americans. May God bless this great nation, the United States of America. Thank you all very, very much.
And in his speech, President Bush outlined a 4-point plan for peace in the Middle East and called for an end to Arab-Israeli hostilities. He told Congress it's time now to turn our attention to domestic issues like the economy, crime, and transportation. Richard?
The last of the freed American prisoners of war arrived at a U.S. hospital ship in Bahrain today. They were given a hero's welcome, too.
How you feeling? Great. Woo! Yeah!
guys. That's back. Good to be home. Many looked undernourished, and according to a ship's doctor, some had been, quote, slapped around, including 3 whose eardrums had been punctured. 2 went on board in stretchers, Air Force Captain William Andrews and Army Staff Sergeant Daniel Stamaris. Earlier in the day, when they arrived in Saudi Arabia before going to the hospital ship, they met General Norman Schwarzkopf. And then a moment, caught on videotape across the tarmac. 2 friends, the joy of being back and knowing the job is done.
And today, Japan's parliament has voted to keep its promise to help pay the international war debt. Today, after some internal debate, Japan agreed to send $8.6 billion. And also today, the Prime Minister of Britain was the first Western head of state to visit Kuwait since the war ended. Prime Minister John Major ignored his military advisors who warned him of the lack of law and order in Kuwait because he wanted to congratulate British troops in person for a job well done. The Prime Minister was given a souvenir of the war, a Soviet-made AK-47 rifle. Mr. Major later met with Kuwaiti Crown Prince Saad Abdullah Al Sabah. The prince and his advising family members promised to hold elections but did not say when. Tonight, the White House says President Bush will soon make a personal visit to the Persian Gulf, but they won't say when. Here is some information that might prove very useful to the families of reservists and National Guard members who served in the Gulf. It's a toll-free hotline at the Department of Labor for information about employee rights. Here's the number, 1-800-442-2VET. That's 1-800-442-2838. Under federal law, reservists are guaranteed to resume their jobs when they return from duty. This number will be staffed between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. Pacific time, and otherwise there's a recorder there to take names and numbers and get back to you with information. There is other news tonight, more bad news about the drought. An official state of emergency was declared this evening in Contra Costa County.
And one of the major lumber companies in the Northwest says it will bow to public opinion and stop clear-cutting in tonight. Reporter Mark Brown joins us now with the latest from our sister station in Los Angeles. Mark?
Well, Richard and Anna, a hail of blows and searing pain. That's what 25-year-old Rodney Glenn King remembers most about the incident that placed him at the center of a storm of outrage. He's angry, and he says heads should roll over this incident, but he is also grateful to have escaped with his life. Tonight, he was released from L.A. County Jail. His parole had been, he had been held because of a possible violation of his parole. That charge was lifted, as well as a possible charge of evading arrest and battery on a police officer. Those charges were also not charged by the district attorney's office. King was arrested on Sunday night, or Sunday morning, early Sunday morning, after a high-speed chase in which police said he, in his Hyundai, in his wife's Hyundai, had been going over 110 miles an hour on the freeway and then continued speeding on surface streets. He was then beaten for more than a minute and a half by L.A. police officers in what witnesses say was an obvious misuse of force. He described the pain of the incident.
Shock and worried, you know, scared, real scared. I'm glad I'm not dead, that's all.
He showed the wounds that he received there. His face was badly swollen. He had a big bruise on his arm, several bruises all over his body. His right ankle is broken. He has gouge wounds on his back. He says those are from the taser gun that officers, he said, repeatedly used against him. They would use the taser on him, leave it in for a few seconds, and then pull it out again, and then continue to beat him. He says the pain, he's recovering from the pain. He said, in fact, that the pain got so bad, the beating continued so badly that the pain stopped happening. He stopped feeling the pain at one point during the beating. He was so out of it at that point. He has since gone home, of course, to his family. The FBI, the LAPD Special Investigations Division, as well as the District Attorney's Office are all looking into this case right now. In fact, the director of the FBI, William Sessions, has said that he is taking a personal interest in seeing that this case is investigated to the fullest. Thousands of angry phone calls have poured into LAPD headquarters, calls from as far away as Rhode Island. Tomorrow, Police Chief Daryl Gates is expected to hold a major news conference to give us more of the department's side of the story, as well as the latest word on the investigations. Reporting live in Los Angeles, I'm Mark Brown. Now back to you in San Francisco.
Mark, we understand that officials from the Los Angeles NAACP and the ACLU say this is not an isolated incident. What is the community reaction there today as the investigation seems to be growing?
The community reaction is one of intense anger and outrage. Thousands of calls, as I said, pouring into City Hall, into LAPD headquarters, as well as into the news stations here in Los Angeles. Our switchboard has been lit up pretty much all day with people calling, expressing their outrage about this incident. I remember looking at the call sheet just a few minutes ago. There was one call in support of the police, and the rest, literally hundreds of others, expressing outrage at this incident.
Mark Brown in Los Angeles, thank you very much.
Tonight, Contra Costa County is...
We have the biggest audio and video selection in the Bay Area. Take televisions. Most stores have a fairly good selection. But the Good Guys has more than 200 TVs. Outstanding. Stereo components? Only the Good Guys has more than 300 stereo components and systems. It's really amazing. So with the Good Guys, you'll always find what you're looking for. We're the Good Guys. We gotta be good.
In an exclusive interview, Prince General Khalid bin Sultan, the commander of the Joint Arab Forces, says Saddam's days are numbered.
My strong feeling that Saddam will never last more than 2 months from now.
And the president stands before Congress with the highest approval rating in history.
Our uncommon coalition must now work in common purpose to forge a future that should never again be held hostage to the darker side of human nature.
The latest from the Gulf and the president's new world order tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington with the latest on the Persian Gulf, Ted Koppel.
Before we focus on our main story tonight, the soldiers seen boarding this plane, members of the 24th Mechanized Infantry Division, 105 of them left a military airbase in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, less than an hour ago, as ordered by President Bush. The 24th was among the first units into the Gulf last August. Their trip back to Fort Stewart, Georgia, will take about 24 hours. Now our main focus. Mark the date well, March 6th, 1991. In years to come, this will almost certainly stand as the high watermark of the Bush administration. No president has ever stood statistically higher in the public's approval. It is difficult to remember an occasion when a president has been more enthusiastically received on Capitol Hill than was President Bush by the joint session of Congress that convened tonight. It is possible, but highly unlikely, that he will ever enjoy a more universal moment of approval than before and during his speech this evening. The president is a sufficiently skilled and experienced politician to know that this kind of capital must be spent wisely and quickly, because rarely, if ever, does it last long. Here's Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield.
Listen. Listen to the sounds of exultation. Yes, the Congress always cheers the president, but when was the last time you heard cheers like this? By every measure, a torrent of praise from across the spectrum, celebrations in print and in public, poll numbers of record proportions, the swift, total victory in the Persian Gulf has given the president a stature unequaled by any president in decades, a stature especially remarkable for a political figure of limited eloquence or charisma.
The president not only has the support of 91% of the people who believe that he's doing a good job, but that support is deep.
There's no question that right now George Bush is as popular as he or as any president could possibly be. But there are other questions about that popularity. First, can it last? Second, what does he intend to do with it? Presidential popularity can be a fleeting thing. Harry Truman had an 87% approval rating in the summer of 1945. He had half that much a year later. Lyndon Johnson won an historic landslide in 1964. He was embroiled in Vietnam 2 years later, and his approval rating sunk. Richard Nixon won 49 states in 1972. He was driven from office within 21 months. And only last fall, Bush himself appeared to be on the ropes.
The president was sinking like a stone in popularity, and members of his party were running against him, and it was sure to be opposition, and he was likely to be, so all the wise people said here in Washington, he'd probably be a one-term president. Turned out the way Jimmy Carter was. Now he's the new Caesar.
The build-up in August in the Persian Gulf didn't affect the 1990 elections. He can't bank on his 85% approval rating for more than a couple of months at the most.
But the victory in the Gulf is utterly unlike anything that has happened to America in nearly 50 years. And that, Republicans argue, can make a big difference.
He's made us proud again. He's made us confident again. So do I believe the Democrats